Welcome to the LDN radio show, brought to you by the LDN Research Trust. I'm your host, Linda Elsiegood. I have an exciting lineup of guest speakers who are LDN experts in their field. We will be discussing low-dose naltrexone and its many uses in autoimmune diseases, cancers, etc. Thank you for joining us. This show is sponsored by our members who made donations. We'd like to give them a very big thank you. We have to cover the monthly costs of the radio station's software, bandwidth, phone lines and phone calls to be able to continue with the radio show. And thank you for listening. Today my guest is Carrie from the United States. Now Carrie had shingles at a very early age. It's a very complex story that we're going to hear. So she then had a diagnosis of PHN, which is nerve damage due to the shingles, and that then led to CPRS, which is chronic pain syndrome. So thank you for joining us today, Carrie.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.
So before you realised that you had shingles, were you a healthy young lady?
Oh, I would say I was extremely healthy. I was finishing my master's degree in teaching and was just wrapping up my thesis project. So I would say I was healthy. I was under a bit of stress, but I was healthy, yes.
So how long do you think from when you started to feel sick, obviously when you had shingles but they didn't know, until you actually had the diagnosis? How long did that take?
It took a month. And in that time, I graduated from my program and I went on a trip to Jamaica as a delayed honeymoon. And so when I came back, I wasn't sure if those bumps were from mosquito bites, because it's a heavy mosquito population, or if there were these things called shingles, which of course at that time I only thought belonged on the rooftops of a house. I didn't understand what shingles were or how they operate.
And you, just to tell everybody, how old were you at this point?
I was 25 when I was diagnosed with nerve damage from shingles.
So you came back from the honeymoon and had these lumps. What happened then? What did they do?
I couldn't see them. So they were on the back of my neck around my shoulder blades. So there was no way for me to see them. So they had to bother me enough for my husband to notice to look. And as soon as I went into the doctor, I think he was more flabbergasted by my age and my relative health, but he immediately knew what was going on.
Wow.
And I think you're actually pretty late to treat it, but we're going to do that just in case. And I would argue that by the time I saw him a month later, I think he had a good indication that this was going to be problematic since it took so long to start antivirals in the first place.
So tell us the story. What happened next?
So for me, I was at an interesting juncture in my life. Like I said, I had just gotten my master's degree and I was trying to decide where I was going to teach, what opportunities were ahead. And when this happened, it kind of threw a wrench in it because I wasn't sure how it was going to impact my ability to perform my duties. And I was noticing I was having a hard time in cars traveling. My nerves were not adapting well to the damage. So my husband actually had an opportunity to move across the country from Georgia, where we were, to California. And his company offered to pay for that move. And I'm really, really fortunate that we took that opportunity to relocate, because what it meant for me was moving from, the Southeast, where we were in a hub in Atlanta of medical advancement and pretty systemic healthcare. But California, I feel like, represents the future of medicine in a lot of ways. I found more alternative treatments out here than would have been available in Georgia, for instance. And eventually that's what led me to find specialists who were able to diagnose this autoimmune disease, CPRS, which was triggered by shingles. And that's what led me to LDN.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's just recap on what you had to live with on a daily basis before you found LDN. What was a day like? What did you experience? What were the symptoms?
My life before LDN was not really what I would consider a worthy life. I lost complete use of my left arm within 2 years of shingles. Eventually, it shut down the left arm to the point where it was purple and cold. Within 3 years, I was meeting with surgeons to come up with plans for amputation.
Oh, goodness.
The situation get to the point where I couldn't stave off infection from a lack of circulation. When I was 29, I did find a surgeon who suggested this as an alternative should the arm continue to waste. And for me, that was it was a wake-up call, because who wants to willingly give away part of their body? And what does that mean for the rest of my life? If I can't use my arm, but the nerve damage is actually in my spine, how is removing the arm going to solve any of the underlying problems? And I would argue that it's a great example of the difference between the way that we see medical care in the United States versus the way that that countries who I believe have a more evolved way of taking care of their people see it. And what I mean by that specifically is that, are we treating illness? Are we treating symptoms? Or are we actually looking at the best outcomes for the health of everyone in a country? And I would argue that in the United States, it's about making money off of people's sickness and not about securing their health. So for me, what that looked like is I was taking 32 pills a day before I was 30 years old. And all of those medications were prescribed by a doctor who was simply addressing symptoms and not actually figuring out how to solve the source of disease itself.
Okay. So what was the plan?
I think the plan was for me to just listen to what my doctor said and keep taking pills until eventually I died from complications of those plans. And I didn't agree with that. And neither, I was very fortunate. My husband attended every single doctor's appointment with me for 8 straight years. He has an amazing job that believes in providing benefits for their employees. And I am a benefactor of that philosophy of caring for one's employees. I was able to start thinking outside the box because I had another human being with me along every step of the process, questioning, saying things like, this isn't the person I, first met when we were together. And this person is slowly degrading over time to the point where he couldn't even tell what medications were treating what problems without causing other problems. So for us, it meant starting completely over and questioning every medication I was taking. And eventually, when the doctors didn't want to answer those questions, it was removing those doctors and finding somebody who was willing to help me find my health again, despite the complications in front of them. So I had to actually find a human being who happened to be a doctor who wanted to have a conversation that most doctors that I found do not want to have, which is, are we actually helping you with these medications, or do we need to start back at the beginning and strip them all down and get back to solving the problem itself? And for me, that meant finding a doctor who took me off of all those medications in a safe way, and who then could help me build a path forward. Ironically, that ended in me getting pregnant.
Yeah. Wow.
Because some of the medications that we end up taking every day, they don't necessarily help you regain your health. Instead, they add more layers to the complexities of our health. And by taking away all those medications from the beginning, my body was able to return to a sense of normalcy and regulating itself. And that led to what is natural when you are, in your, for me, early 30s, which was I started getting healthy enough to ovulate again. And all of a sudden, for, 7-8 years, we were told children weren't possible because I was so sick. And then you just take away all the medication, and there I am pregnant. And the wonderful thing, there's so many wonderful things to my story, but the really wonderful thing is the magic that is our bodies by themselves without interference. And what I mean by that is my body was able to go into remission because of this pregnancy. I was able to go off of every medication that I was left on, through the stripping process. And my body was able to fix the problem itself. The CPRS itself went into remission. I didn't even realize I was pregnant until I woke up one day and my arm was warmer. It became pink again instead of purple. I can't explain to you what it's like when you've had a problem for years and years and years, and you haven't been able to use your body in the proper way for years. And then you wake up and you can actually feel something. To find out that that was all happening because I was creating a child, a dream deferred, I thought. Mm-hmm. That's miraculous.
It is amazing.
It gave me a second chance. And I was able to go back to physical therapy and get full use of my left arm back.
Really? Wow.
In the next 9 months. And it was really just, it was the gift that I never thought would happen. Mm. And it doesn't last. The thing about autoimmune disease and remission and pregnancy is that it's usually a temporary relief. And then once you have your kid, it does come back. Your remission goes away. And that's what happened for me. I support a few groups on Facebook who deal with chronic pain, especially with nerve damage and shingles. And so I had heard little stories that would give you, gleams of light about, hey, I got shingles, I got pregnant, I actually had relief from it while I was pregnant, but there was no answer to what you do afterwards, because it's great that you had relief and that you were able to get better for a short period of time. But what happens when you have that baby, and then not only do you have to take care of yourself, but you're responsible for protecting and raising this little infant, Mm-hmm. In my case, I ended up taking a vacation to Australia when my son was about 5 months old. And I was still going pretty strong. I mean, pretty strong in terms of using my arm and being able to travel and move. And I got a little, let's just call it overzealous. Mm-hmm. I decided to go swimming with some sharks in Sydney with my second chance. And I ended up in the Pacific Ocean in the wintertime, and I got too cold. And it took me about 6 weeks to recover from that trip and from that excursion. And that's when we realized that my arm wasn't going to warm back up on its own. So when my son was about 6 months old, I ended up back at a specialist office going, okay, it looks like this reprieve is over, and we need to come up with another plan, because now I'm actually more concerned than I ever had been before, because I know what I can lose, and I still know what I have left to do in terms of a child that I'm responsible for at least the next 18 years. And I got really lucky. A friend of mine in one of these support groups online reached out and said, hey, I want you to look up a drug called LDN. And I want you to look up this organization called the LDN Trust. And I did. And that opened the next door forward for me.
Wow. How easy was it to get a prescription?
I think this is how easy was it to get the prescription?
Mm-hmm.
I had to find a doctor that was willing to look at the 12 inches of printed out research that I put in and say, sure, we'll take a chance.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, that doctor has no idea what LDN is. He did not read any of the research. He has no operating knowledge of how it works, but he does, at my request, write my prescription every 3 months. And I have to get that filled in Florida on the other side of the country through the mail.
Mm-hmm.
It's not covered by insurance. There's no way that I have been able to figure out to get it covered by insurance. And because my doctor is open-minded enough to write the prescription, but not knowledgeable enough to have any awareness of it, mistakes happen. This last time that I went in, he unfortunately wrote it for the wrong amount. And I ended up in another flare because, with LDN, every fraction matters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like I found myself crowdsourcing my healthcare, trying to figure out, what the ideal dosage is, what the best practices are in terms of mail-in pharmacies. It's been frustrating, but without LDN, I wouldn't be here in the first place, and I certainly wouldn't be able to say that it's literally the only prescription drug I take. I have a lot of issues when it comes to my struggle with LDN.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it addresses LDN as a concept is a complete shift from the way that America sees healthcare. LDN treats the cause, not the symptoms. Most times when you're walking into a doctor's office in the United States, they're looking at ways to prescribe you medications that will take care of your complaints. LDN is the opposite of that. You're trying to find the source and you're trying to understand it, which means that it's not necessarily about finding relief in the short term. It's about taking the chance that in the long term, this is going to make your body better functioning overall.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just a completely different way of looking at treating a problem.
So how long have you been taking LDN now?
I've been taking LDN for 25 months.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't know what my ideal dose is. I would love to be able to have a doctor to help me in that process. But instead, I find myself crowdsourcing these groups and trying to figure out, tips for how to get through flares and how to get through adjustment periods and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And what about your arm? Do you have full use of your arm still?
I would say that I have full use of my arm. It is, a different shade. It's colder. It's a little bit more purple. There are days that I drop things with my hand. There's a lot of time, especially in the winter when it's colder and when it's raining, that I can't lift my arm above my head. My shoulder freezes on and off. And I'm kind of really stubborn about it. I always am working out, going to PT. I do have my own laser, which is incredibly helpful. It helps recirculate the blood through the class 4 laser. And so on days when it is particularly painful and difficult, I can treat myself, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But yet again, that was something I had to pay for out of pocket. And if you were to ask about laser therapy in any doctor's appointment, that I know of, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So you have to be ridiculously stubborn for yourself.
Well,
and clever.
so if you were to rate your quality of life before LDN on a score of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, what would it have been?
Oh man. Maybe a 2 before LDN. LDN gives me everything. It's so much more than the good that it does just by taking it. There's a psychological component when you're chronically ill, and when you've been through the kind of pharmaceutical trial and error that I have, you become almost afraid of medication. You don't know what happens if your prescriptions don't arrive. Does that mean that you're going to be ill from not taking your medication? Does that mean that you're going to be ill from taking it but not in the right amount? I find with LDN, it's a completely different safety profile. It's one that I'm extremely comfortable with. I know if I don't take LDN, the worst that's going to happen to me is that my body is already going to do what it was already doing. Mm-hmm. It's not going to send me into withdrawal. It's not going to make me unable to care for my child and my family. Mm-hmm. I've been on medications for the same exact conditions that have caused brain damage, and I don't find that with LDN. And I'm incredibly grateful.
So,
for in particular the safety aspect.
What would you say your quality of life is like now?
Well, I'm working and I am living. I would say that I'm rounding a good 9 on this. It would be a 10 if it would stay in remission, but that's asking for a bit much, I think.
Well, what an amazing, fantastic story. I'm just blown away by it. And thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing and for raising awareness about LDN. It really does make every difference, because I wouldn't have known about it if it wasn't for somebody else who heard what you guys are doing. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
This show is sponsored by our members who made donations. We'd like to give them a very big thank you. We have to cover the monthly costs of the radio station's software, bandwidth, phone lines and phone calls to be able to continue with the radio show. And thank you for listening. Any questions or comments you may have, please email me, Linda, Linda, at ldnrt.org. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciated your company. Until next time, stay safe and keep well.